cost of everything is going up at the moment, including chicken feed. So we're going to look at ways that you can get more out of every bag of chicken feed that you buy. We're going to look at it from order of easiest to hardest. We're going to look at soaking your feed, fermenting your feed, and then sprouting your feed. So let's look at the easiest one, soaking your feed. Soaking your chicken feed is a great way to reduce waste. And what I mean by that is feed can be quite sort of dry and powdery and full of little bits and pieces. And you want those little bits and pieces because they're often your vitamins and minerals and things like that. But when you feed it dry, these things often just go to the bottom of the feeder or the tray and don't get eaten. So soaking is a great way to make sure your chickens are eating all of that. And there's a few things to think about when soaking. You want to soak a feed that is a whole grain type of feed. Soaking a pelletized feed just turns into mush, so I wouldn't recommend that. If you've got a pellet or a crumble and you want to dampen it a little bit, go ahead and do that. It really helps. Just add a small amount of water, mix it up and feed it out to your chickens. But when we're talking soaking, we're talking a whole grain type of feed. So what I like to do when I'm soaking my feed is use a bucket with a lid that doesn't fit too tightly, and this is actually a compost caddy, which is great because the lid is loose fitting, but it fits on in there so air can get in and out, but mice can't get in. So what you don't want to do is leave your soaking feed open, or you might have some unpleasant surprises as to what might fall in when you're not looking. So a little bucket like this is a great way to go about it. And that's really all there is to soaking feed. You put the feed in dry, you cover it with water, and you leave it overnight and it is soaked feed. It's important to remember that when you're soaking your feed, it will bulk up. But that doesn't mean it's getting any more nutritious for your chickens. So soaking feed doesn't really improve nutritional composition, it just helps avoid wastage, and it's really good in the summertime because the water is into the grain, so your chickens are going to get a higher water intake to help them in the heat. So soaking, really easy, recommend it for reducing feed waste, but don't think just because it's got bigger, it's providing more food for your chickens. That is not something that soaking can achieve. The next level of getting more out of your feed is fermenting it. And again, you want to use a whole grain type food to do this with. I have seen people do it with the pelletized or crumble feeds. I personally haven't used that for fermenting, but the whole grain mushed up sort of mix here works really, really well for fermenting. So what you're going to do with fermenting is exactly like soaking. Bucket with a lid that doesn't exclude air, so it's got to have air go in and out. Put the food in, put your water in, then you need to leave it. And how long you need to leave it depends on the temperature of where it's sitting. So if it's warmer, it's going to start fermenting faster, and if it's cold, it's going to be much slower to start fermenting, and if it's really cold, it might not be able to start at all. And this is, if you haven't fermented things before, this is the bit that makes people a bit nervous, but it's quite easy. It's easy to tell that your food is fermenting because you will see bubbles and foam and things coming up to the surface. So don't freak out about that. There even might be some sort of white flaky things on the surface of the water, and that's okay too. If it smells yeasty or a bit like wine or something like that, then you're fine. If it smells really, really bad, or you've got actual molds growing on it, then it's not fine. But these are quite easy to see. You can see it, you can smell it. So don't be worried about doing something wrong with your fermenting. It's not difficult. Now what I do from my fermenting system is I use the 1 bucket system. I don't go, here's 5 buckets at all different days of fermenting. I just start off with soaked feed, and that is day 1. Day 1, the chickens are just getting soaked feed. Day 2, it's starting to ferment. Day 3, it gets more and more fermenty until we get to 7 days where I reset the process. So all I do is as I take the feed out to feed it, I just add dry feed back in, top up water if it needs it, and let it keep on rolling. And then when I get to sort of 7 or 8 days, I scrape out what's in the bucket, give it a scrub down, and start again. And if you really want to keep the fermenting going really strongly, so you're day one with fermented feed, you just want to keep back a small portion before you scrub it and add that back in, and that will kickstart it into fermenting nice and quickly for you. Really easy system. This is what I do for my flock all the time. I highly recommend doing that. Now with fermented feed, it does improve the nutritional value of the feed a bit, and from that I mean it becomes more bioavailable. So you're not sort of getting more out of it, but your chickens are able to digest more of what's actually in the feed, and so from that perspective, it's really helping to get more out of your feed. And of course, it's bulked up just like the soaked feed, and it reduces waste and all those wonderful things. Let me show you exactly how I use my fermented feed to make up my flock's food every day. They love it, I love it, it's a really great system. Let's look at how I use my fermented feed to actually feed out twice a day to my flock. So what I do, I have my bucket in the feed shed, I have my mixing bucket, and I take out the amount of wet feed that I want to use for the meal. And then I add some dry feed to it. Now that's important because otherwise the food's going to be really wet and goopy, and your chickens are going to have to fish it out of the water, and they don't love doing that. So a little bit of dry feed to take it to sort of a crumbly type consistency. So that is nice and easy and ready to feed. And then what I do is I replace what I've taken out with dry feed. And if it needs a water top up, I do that, because you always want the water to be covering the feed completely. You don't want feed sitting up out of the water, or it can grow molds. It needs to be under the surface of the water. And then I just keep that going each day until it's time to tip it out, scrub it out, and start again. Sprouting your chicken feed is the most labor-intensive of these methods we've talked about so far, and it's not something I do very regularly because my flock has access 24/7 to all sorts of green plants and things, so I don't find that sprouting is necessary for them. But if you're in a situation where your flock doesn't have access to green food on a regular basis, sprouting can be an excellent way to get green food into their diet and to improve the amino acid digestibility and micronutrients that are available in grains. So here I have some buckwheat sprouts, and they've been sprouting for about 4 days, and it looks like they need a bit longer than that. I don't normally do the sprouting, and it is coming into the winter time here, so they've been quite slow. Only their little roots are out at the moment, and you want some green to be coming through. So it really depends on your temperature and the sort of grain that you're sprouting in terms of how long it takes, but usually 4 to 5 days is how long it's going to take to have a nice ready to go sprout. You may or may not be able to sprout your actual chicken feed. So my chicken feed here won't sprout because it is often chopped up. They're not whole grains, so to speak. They've been mashed and pulverized and all mixed together. So most of these are not going to sprout. You might need to buy just some plain whole grain wheat or something like that to sprout, but just see what is working in your own situation. If you do want to try sprouting grains for your chickens, sprouting is a little bit different from soaking and fermenting because it's going to need fresh water changes every day, or it might grow mold, or it might start fermenting, which is not what you're going for sprouting. So depending again on the temperature of where you are, you want to soak your grain for up to 8 hours, or even longer if it's cold. Then you want to drain the water off and leave it sitting in a pan, and you want to rinse it with fresh water twice a day until you get your sprouts happening. If you are in a warm environment and you just leave it without the fresh water changes, it can grow mold. If you're in a colder environment, you might only have to rinse it once a day or every second day. So just really see how it goes for you. But again, like the fermented feed, it's quite easy to see if it's starting to go wrong. So you don't need to worry that you might feed your chickens something that's not good for them.